This is Ryan. He's a pilot and he has a YouTube channel called Missionary Bush Pilot where he shares his adventures flying in Papua New Guinea. And he recently posted a video titled My Most Stressful Instrument Approach of 2024. Now, I've talked about a lot of mishaps where pilots have died flying in the weather, and that's why in today's video, I'm going to share the truth about how stressful Ryan's flight really was and compare it to some of those other tragedies. I'm Hoover, and welcome to your Pilot Debrief.
Welcome back here to Papua New Guinea. My name is Ryan. I'm taking you guys on a 2-hour flight from Goroka all the way up to the islands to Hoskins. It is about 7:30 almost now. I've got to top up with a little bit of fuel because the weather is not what I was expecting it to be, and that's all right. So I'm taking extra fuel in case I have to shoot the approach or if I have to shoot it a couple times. We'll see when we get out there. I'll go over the weather in just a second and see what it's looking like because it might have changed in the past 20 minutes.
I like how Ryan's already planning ahead. He knows the weather is going to be a factor, so he's taken some extra fuel to give him some more options. And I also like the fact that he's going to check the weather again because it could have changed in the last 20 minutes. I've covered too many tragedies that were largely a result of the pilot not taking a few minutes to check the weather. It's one of the easiest things you can do when you're getting ready to fly, and I'll never understand why some pilots don't think it's necessary.
Okay, so we're starting here in Goroka. We're heading out over here top of Wasu area, which looks like there might be some stormy kind of stuff going on. And heading all the way out here by Kembe to Hoskins. If I go over here to the satellite, according to what this is showing, I might head to Wasu and then just come down maybe 10 or 15 miles more to the south just so I can get around that. And then straight line up over to Hoskins, and it looks like I'm just gonna just cut the edge of all of that weather right now. Last thing I can look at is low clouds out here in Hoskins, and it looks like it's just going to be broken to scattered at 10 o'clock when I get out there, so shouldn't be an issue getting in. Shouldn't be. We will see.
Famous last words. Anytime a pilot says the weather shouldn't be an issue, it almost always ends up being a problem. The thing you need to know about Ryan is that when it comes to flying in Papua New Guinea, most of the airfields don't have weather reporting capabilities, so he kind of has to be his own meteorologist. This means he's got to use whatever resources he has available, including calling or texting people at these different airfields, hoping they can look outside and tell him how bad the weather is. One of the resources you saw Ryan using was an app called windy.com, and I really like this app because it gives great visuals for the satellite imagery, cloud coverage, you can see where thunderstorms are at, plus it has a ton of other features. However, this isn't a replacement for an official weather briefing, but it's just something that gives you a great visual representation of what the weather is doing. Now, in a video I made last week, I talked about how the pilot didn't check the weather before taking off, but what I didn't tell you was that when he was at the airport restaurant before the flight, a witness overheard the wife ask the pilot about the weather, and he told her it wasn't that bad and they could go around it or above it. Unfortunately, that wasn't true, and they died about 30 minutes after takeoff when he flew directly towards the huge line of storms in front of him. However, when it comes to Ryan, he's always being very conservative, and he does a great job of explaining to the viewer what the weather is doing and his thought process for how to handle it. Now, in this case, he had a pretty good plan, and he ended up taking off just a few minutes later. Most of the flight was uneventful until he got about 20 minutes away from his destination, and that's when the weather started to become a problem.
What my plan is I'm going to be starting my top of descent right up here. And when I get to the coastline, if I have not broke out, at that point, that's going to be my decision. I have to go fly the approach, GPS approach, non-precision approach to get in. If I do see the coastline, that's when I'm just going to, and I can see far enough, maybe 10 miles or so, then my plan of action is just to remain marginal VFR, head down the coastline, and then work my way in that way. It's usually a little bit easier.
Basically, Ryan's got two options to find the runway and land at his destination. Once he gets over the water, if he can see the coastline, he can drop down to low altitude and just follow the coast until he sees the runway. But if he can't see the coastline, then he's going to have to fly the instrument approach procedure. I'm sure there's some people that are wondering, why doesn't he just descend once he gets over the water? That way he won't have to worry about running into the mountains, and once he gets below the clouds, he can just point towards the coast and fly visually from there. Problem is, doing something like that can be very dangerous because if you can't see the coastline up at altitude, then you have no idea how low the bottom of the clouds are, and even if he gets under the clouds, there's no guarantee that the forward visibility is going to be good enough to see where you're going. It's just not worth the risk when you have an instrument approach procedure that's designed to keep you safe.
let's just go over this in case we do have to do it. I don't think I'm going to have to do it, but I'd rather have it already prepped. So, making sure that it is the GNSS, let's go ahead and actually hit procedures over here and just go ahead and put it in while we're doing this. Select approach, and we want Bravo over the water. We want via Whiskey Delta, which is the one way out here over the water. Minimums, we're going to do Barrow, and it is 1,080. We're going to go ahead and just load that in there. So what that does is it basically puts it there, but it doesn't. You can see I'd be coming up here over the water and then heading out that way.
Reviewing the instrument approach is one of the most important things you can do as a pilot when you're flying in the weather, especially if you're going into an unfamiliar field. One of the videos I made recently talked about how there were 3 pilots flying into Aspen, Colorado, and it was obvious that they spent little or no time reviewing the approach, even though it's a very challenging procedure. Instead, they tried to figure it out while they were on the approach, and they ended up crashing, and 2 of them died. And that's why it's so important to take the time when you're up at cruise altitude to study the approach and get ahead of the aircraft. When it comes to Ryan, now that he has the approach loaded, listen to him explain how he's going to fly it.
If we do have to fly, we'll head out to Whiskey Delta 3, head over, and then start down to 1,500 feet. I'm going to fly it like step downs because I want to get to my lowest altitude as quickly as I can, so I'm going to be doing 1,000 feet per minute coming in. That way, in case there is a cloud layer here, and I'm coming in this way, maybe through the clouds or something, let's see, even the cloud is at an angle like this, going down to the ground. I want to get down as quickly as I can so I can get underneath of it and then remain visual from that point on.
This is where I'm going to have to disagree with Ryan a little bit because there are 2 methods to fly this approach. You can use a continuous descent angle, or you can do what Ryan's doing, which is often referred to as the dive and drive method. The problem is this requires a steeper than normal rate of descent, typically at least 1,000 feet per minute, which Ryan mentioned, but you also have to worry about the step down fix. So he has to dive down to 1,500 feet and then increase the power to maintain airspeed as he levels off. Then he has to drive in until he gets to the final approach fix, and then dive down again and level off at the minimum descent altitude of 1,080. If you haven't done this before or in a long time, it can be very stressful because even though the autopilot can help, you've got to maintain a constant cross-check, and there's a lot of things happening in a very short amount of time, and it's very easy to fall behind the aircraft. The other thing I don't like about the dive and drive method is something that Ryan didn't talk about. He never mentioned what his VDP was. The VDP is the point from which a normal descent can be made to the runway, and non-precision approaches can sometimes be misleading when they don't publish the VDP. That's because it looks like you can just drive in until 1.2 miles, and then if you see the runway at that point, you can land. The problem is, if you wait that long, you've got to lose about 1,000 feet in just 1.2 miles, which is going to result in a very steep and most likely unstable approach. Instead, if you want to fly a stable 3-degree path, your VDP is about 3 miles from the end of the runway. That's almost 2 miles before the missed approach point. I covered a really good example of how dangerous this is on another video on my channel, where a pilot was flying a non-precision approach and he didn't calculate his VDP. He ended up being 500 feet high over the end of the runway, and then he made a terrible decision that got everyone killed. I'm not trying to say that Ryan did anything wrong. Ryan has 7 years of experience landing at some of the most challenging airports in the world, and he knows exactly what his visual cues are, and he was very conservative and safe. The point I'm trying to make is that there are a few things you need to think about before you fly a non-precision approach. All of that being said, there's one more item that Ryan needs to talk about.
If we do have to go missed, then we're going to do immediate left-hand turn, direct track back to Whiskey Hotel, and climb to 5,000 feet, and re-enter it. Like I said, I did bring extra fuel today. I did my calculations a little bit ago. I've got about an hour of fuel extra. Once I get to 580 on my fuel, that is the point where I have to leave and I have to go down to Gasmata. No more drying so that I can get there and still have the fuel reserve to get back here and try it again later on this afternoon if it clears up.
No one wants to fly a missed approach, but if you don't take the time to review the procedure, that's probably going to be the one time you're going to have to fly it. That's why I thought Ryan did a good job by reviewing the procedure, because he's staying ahead of the aircraft and he's also figured out the fuel that he needs to divert and still get back to the airport later, because that's not something you want to be calculating after you go missed approach. Now that Ryan has done just about everything he can to get himself ready, it's time to begin the descent for the approach.
vertical track.
Here we go. Time to go down. This line right here that I'm on, 5,600. So that's going to be my minimum safe for this route. So we're going to just go down to that for now. I had it set up for 800 feet per minute. My descent, we click on over here. Right there. So we're going to go on down 800 feet per minute and see if we break out. Otherwise, we'll just remain at 5,600. We'll see how it plays out.
It's worth pointing out that even though Ryan is flying in the weather, he's not talking to a controller, and that's because flying is a lot different in Papua New Guinea, and that just adds to the stress for every flight. You've got mountains all around you, and that means you need to maintain 100% awareness of where you are and the minimum safe altitudes for your route of flight. Even if you're flying in VFR conditions, you still need to know where the mountains are. I talked about a tragedy during a recent live stream where the pilot took off, and even though it was VFR, it was nighttime and very dark outside, and he flew right into the side of the mountain. It's important to keep in mind that this is Ryan's initial descent from his cruising altitude, and this isn't the approach. Right now he's trying to get lower because if he can see the coastline, then he can fly visually and he won't need to fly the approach, but let's see what happens when he gets below the weather.
All right, I am seeing the coastline. Wait, no, yes, I am seeing the coastline. It's not great. I might have 4 miles visibility. I'm just gonna go ahead and shoot the approach. We'll go ahead, procedures, activate the approach.
I thought this was a great decision, and it sets a really good example for pilots. If you look at the video, it's clear that Ryan can see the ground, and he could probably fly all the way down to the coastline where he's at. Now, I'm sure that might be very tempting to do because you assume that he can stay VFR. But the problem is the clouds could get worse the closer he gets to the airfield, and then he could find himself in a very dangerous situation. Despite the fact that Ryan has thousands of hours of experience flying in conditions like this, he still decided to take the conservative option and fly the approach because he knows that's going to keep him safe. I'm going to let this play all the way through so you can get an idea of the pacing and what pilots are doing during an approach and how stressful that can be, and then we'll see what happens at the end.
We got 25 knots of tailwind, so I'm going down at 1,000 feet just so I can make sure I get to my altitudes when I want to. All stations, Hoskins 1271, November Tango Zulu, inbound at Whiskey, India, will be field 37 Hoskins. All right, 1,500 feet, we'll level off, then we'll drop on down to 1,080 after that. Visibility still probably, okay, I'm seeing the coastline over there. So I'm going to be ready to go full or 20 degrees of flaps immediately and push on over. I am starting to see the coastline potentially. Oh, that must be a reef or something. All right, going on down 1,080. Hoskins traffic, November Tango Zulu, Whiskey, Foxtrot. 22 knots tailwind.
Minimums.
All right, there's our minimums. We're level now. All right, well, I'm starting to see the coastline, but I don't see the runway, so I'm going missed.
If you thought that was stressful, just wait until the end. For now, I'm going to fast forward through the missed approach portion of the video because there really isn't a whole lot going on. It took Ryan about 3 minutes to circle back around and start the approach again, so that was just enough time to double check the fuel and make sure the approach is still loaded and everything is ready. Now pay attention to what happens on the next try, and then we'll hear what Ryan had to say at the end.
Minimums.
Here's my minimums. All right, starting to see the coastline. Almost up to my mist. Here's the runway. All right, going down. All right, let's go full
500.
flaps. Checklist is complete.
I should have mentioned this earlier, but you probably noticed that Ryan wasn't using the checklist during the flight. And that's because he's using the box that you see sitting on top of the instrument panel. This is something that Ryan designed called the Buddy Checkbox, and it has switches that give you a visual representation of the most critical items in the checklist that could get you killed. And he didn't ask me to promote it, but I think it's a good tool that could help save lives. So if you want to support both of our channels, go to the website buddycheckbox.com to find out more about it and get one today. Be sure to stick around to the end to hear what Ryan had to say after the landing. And if you want to see another one of my debriefs of Ryan's flights, then check out this video on your screen.
Okay, runway's super wet, but clear. Probably the worst I think I've had landing here ever. So there you go, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this stressful ride along with me today.